Welcome to Mind Your Wedding Business podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Dennis. In addition to leading the charge at Wedding IQ, I also run Fantasy Sound Event Services, a lighting and entertainment company based in Livermore, California, that I founded over 35 years ago. Each week on this podcast, you'll hear thought-provoking and empowering interviews with wedding professionals who have found success in the industry. If you're a business-minded wedding pro who loves love, but also cares about their bottom line, buckle up and get ready to learn from a new industry expert each week. All right, folks, welcome to the next episode of Mind Your Wedding Business. I'm very excited today because I have the one and only, the Wendy Dahl, kind of one of the when I started my WIPA career, she was one of the very first people that I met. And then when I kind of took over for her, I was texting her a lot, like, how do I do this? And how do I do that? So I feel like we go back a long, long time with all that aspects. So your kids were really little when I first met you. How's that?
Right. And my youngest one just graduated high school yesterday. So we've known each other a long time.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy? So, all right. So today you're here to talk about creating and managing growth. Before we do that, you want to give us a little bit of how you got into the wedding business story?
Sure. So I was actually married to a DJ in my first marriage. We were married for 15 years. And when I was at home having babies, I was actually running his DJ business from the house, doing all the bookings and things. And I would go out on events with him. And then I met a wedding planner who was just totally overwhelmed. And I was like, hey, do you need some help? And so I helped her once. And then she was like, what are you doing for the rest of the year? And so I started working with her and kept having babies. And then I finally launched my own business as a wedding planner when my ex-husband transitioned into a corporate job. And so I've been doing weddings now for about 20 years.
No, we don't, you don't have to date yourself.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I still look like I'm 20, right?
100% girl. 100% girl.
But yeah, so I've been doing weddings a really long time. And from there, I got into leadership. Ironically, I'll give you a quick tip on leadership because it's also related to growth. I was so nervous to go to networking events in the beginning that I kind of had to give myself a job so that I felt comfortable going because I'm an introvert. And so that kind of stuff would make me super nervous. And so I started joining boards. I actually served on 2 different boards over a period of a decade. And that's how I met Kevin. And he's such a peach. I'm so glad that he's got this podcast for all of you because he's full of good ideas and has friends all over the country. So, but yeah, so I've been doing weddings ever since. Kind of took a hiatus during COVID, like most of us did. And ironically was hired as a chief growth officer for a healthcare company. And so it's kind of cool to take the skills from hospitality to apply to healthcare and now backwards, where I'm taking the skills that I learned from that business and reapplying them into the wedding business.
Well, that sounds really interesting, actually. So,
right? And
you and I are a lot alike because I'm very much an introvert, and maybe that's why, I've always been on a board or something because I'm more comfortable. I put me in a room, I feel like I'm going into the ocean of piranhas when I walk into a networking room. But if I'm when I've been president of something, I walk in, I use the microphone, I'm very comfortable because I have a job to do. So I'm right there with you.
Exactly.
So, all right. So we're talking today about creating and managing growth. So how do you define growth in your business, Wendy?
For myself, it's revenue, which is actually interesting because most people, the first question they ask a planner, and I'm sure they ask DJs and everything, is, well, how many weddings do you do in a year? And I'm like, I could tell you I did 10 weddings in a year and I made 6 figures, or I could tell you I worked 30 events in a year and made 6 figures. I think the question is which one would you want to work, 10 or 30? And so, I mean, for a planner, it's different, because we've got different levels of service and things. But for me, when I talk about growth, I talk about revenue growth because ultimately we're all in business to generate a revenue because we all have goals that we want to achieve in life. And it takes money to do those things.
All right. Cool. Well, tell us a little bit about the growth that you've had with Chic Productions.
So my growth was actually quite interesting because we niched down. I remember going to it was a business conference for entrepreneurs, none of them in the wedding industry. And they were talking about the importance of niching. And so I was like, okay, well, number one, how can I design a business around my lifestyle? At the time, I was a single mom, 3 kids at home, little. And I was like, okay, I don't want to travel. So that was rule number one. And number two was, how do I go and work with people that had the budgets I wanted to work with? Like automatic, where it was no question of like, oh, do you have enough money to pay for this? It was like they had it. And so I niched into the Indian wedding market, and I called myself the local destination wedding expert. And those two things, I started with a local destination wedding expert, and I was attracting people from all over the country who came to Southern California and got married. And I even said, like, hey, I'm your arms and legs on the ground while you're, off in med school or whatever you're doing. Yes. And so that was step one of like, how do I design my business around my life? And I attracted all kinds of people because they read that, they identified with that concept of I need boots on the ground where I'm getting married because I'm not there. And that makes people nervous sometimes. So yeah, so I answered that. And then two was, I waited for my mentor that I was working with, I was telling you about that I helped her with her, where I actually worked with her for like 6 years. And so, yeah, long time because I was having babies. I mean, what else are you gonna do? Run your ex-husband's business and have babies and work for wedding planners. So yeah, I worked with her for a while. As soon as she retired, then I went into Indian weddings because I just felt like that was the ethical thing. And so as soon as I started talking about doing the Indian weddings, I already had experience doing them because I was doing them with her. And it was kind of funny because my last name's Dahl, which is Scandinavian, but there's also the food doll. It's just the A and the H are backwards. And so, but I think there's a market there that wants like somebody that is used to doing high level weddings and understands their culture. And so from there, we kind of evolved into, I mean, we do Indian weddings all the time, but we do a lot of fusion weddings. So I started talking about the comfort that I bring to somebody's family where I'm like, look, I understand you're like, I just had one the other day. I understand the Chinese culture and I understand the Hindu culture or the Sikh culture, whatever culture it is. I understand all the things that you're going to be doing religiously and the things that are important to each family. And I can walk you right through the whole thing and make you feel comfortable. And it was just, I just saw that I want that. And it was almost like we went from that to how much money do you want? And so I loved it. And it was a fun conversation. And to be honest, those are our most joyful weddings are when we see two cultures embrace each other. And I would say over the past 10 years, we're seeing more of that than we've ever seen before, where multicultural weddings are like beautiful and fun. Hmm.
And I'm up in Northern California. You're Southern California. You could probably draw a line at Bakersfield, and
Yes.
we're like two totally different states, kind of,
Yep.
but we are one. But we are a lot alike with that, because we're up here in the tech world. So there is a lot in the Bay Area here. There's a lot of fusion. It's more common that I do a fusion type wedding than I do, straight
Yep.
Chinese or straight, Filipino, whatever it is, it's more, it's a lot of fusion based stuff right now, which
Yeah. I love it.
it's been, I agree. Cause I've learned so much over the last probably 10, 15 years about all these different cultures and religions and all the different things. And it's so much fun. I always get excited when I learn something new and different because it's like, we think we're experts until we're not. And then we learn and we move forward. So yeah, that's an amazing story. So,
Yeah.
all right. So how does someone know it's time to grow our business? Like what are some of the signs that we can look at?
Well, you're at the beach every day having a good time, or you're just sort of hanging out. No, really, when you know it's time to grow is when it feels easy and you have a lot of time on your hands. And I say time because I know for a lot of people in the wedding industry, we're working for that sort of lifestyle business.
Hmm.
And so, where I know that there's people like us that are like, I mean, it is a lifestyle, but it's also revenue.
Hmm.
And so, where I feel like a lot of people start as a lifestyle and then they start going, okay, I really need to start making money now.
Yeah.
And so, so that would be one of the things where you either you're not making money or you have too much time on your hands because it's just too easy. Or maybe, and maybe because I know the people that have too much time on their hands probably enjoy that. But I think that there's some people that are the achievers that are like, this is easy. Now what?
Hmm.
And so yeah, I would say those would be the indicators that you're ready to grow, and, or you're feeling like, okay, so I've achieved this. Like for me, like I achieved my goal and now what, and then I achieved that
Oh,
goal and then now what? And so I'm constantly looking at, well, how do I perfect this? So it's like when I started, I was doing, 30 weddings a year, but I was a local destination wedding expert. And then it was like, okay, well, how do I do more of that? Less weddings, more money. And so then I niched into the Indian weddings. And that's where it's kind of taken me, where I've kind of adjusted as I've gone, where it's like phased, where I didn't just leap from starting wedding planner, just doing, weddings, to like now I'm this fusion girl that's going all over the place.
yeah, that's
Kids are
amazing.
grown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you just said youngest just graduated
Yeah.
yesterday. So,
Yeah.
so could another sign of growth is that I'm turning down a lot of business? Could that be something?
Yes,
Okay.
actually, I was going to talk about that too.
Okay.
When you're turning down a lot of business, you can either grow in two ways, where you can grow your team and keep your prices the same, or you can increase your prices and do the same amount. So there, yeah, definitely an indicator of growth would be you're turning a lot of business down.
Yeah, there was someone, I don't even remember. I can't credit the speaker, but there was someone said that after every 30 weddings they raised their price, and I was like, that's a very interesting philosophy to like, and they continue to do that in every 30 weddings, and they've been around for like 10 plus years, and they continue to raise their price every 30 weddings. So anyway,
Nice.
yeah, kind of interesting. So
Yeah.
how can a business owner create the opportunity for growth?
Well, I always like to start with preparing for growth, because oftentimes people just jump into those growth shoes and they're like, let's go, and they're not ready. And so I think the first thing is to establish how much you can do. So based on your current team, if it's just you, if it's a few people, what is the maximum amount you could do based on the amount of time you have and resources? And so oftentimes when people get into the growth phase, they don't really understand what's going to happen. Like, let's say there was someone in my market that bought Shivari chairs and caused a price war down here. And then they didn't have enough trucks to service all of the events that they were doing. And so it became, growth actually creates more problems than you would ever expect, because it's like one thing and then all of a sudden you're busy and then you're like, okay, I need people and trucks, and then COVID happens and then you don't have either. And then so you're kind of like trying to jockey your way through everything. And so first is capacity. Second is, when you grow, who can help you grow? And so if you're looking at expanding your team, if you're looking at solving things like logistics, like for the chair example, renting trucks, getting people that have, you're going to have to increase your insurance. You're going to need to do all kinds of different things that you've never done before. And it's kind of like looking at your full circle of like, okay, well, if I do this, it's going to be an increase in revenue, but it's also going to increase payroll, insurance, and equipment costs, and fuel and things like that. But sometimes you look at coaches. Like for me, I was very methodical in my growth because I was working with a coach and I was taking it one step at a time, and I was following and tracking, like with my life, what was going on, so that I wasn't in that state of like, oh my gosh, I have all these weddings and I'm totally overwhelmed. The other thing I would say is establishing who your golden client is. And the golden client is the person that you love to work with, who loves to work with you. So I talk about, my fusion couples where they come in and they're telling me like all their tales of woe about moms and all the drama. And then I just start, going down my path of, they call it the Yoda. She's like Yoda. She just sits there.
You're
She's
about
all
the size of
quiet.
Yoda. You're about right.
I am short. You're right. So, but establishing who that is, because the more precise I was with who I like to work with, not only did I have more fun doing what I was doing, I was actually making more money doing it. And they liked me even more than any other type of client did. So,
Yeah.
so I think that's important if you're in the service-based side of things. If you're in, like, I think a lot about rental companies because I work with them so often when I'm doing design. There's some rental companies that their sweet spot is actually working with planners or venues where it's not working with the client directly. And then there's others that are just like, I'll talk to whoever you want me to talk to as long as they're paying the check and that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. So I would establish which side that falls on for you so that you know exactly who it is that you're going to need to talk to when you start to create growth. And then the last thing to prepare for is who are your golden creative partners. So I often saw this when I was co-director. Back then, it was the Association of Bridal Consultants here in Orange County. It was like the largest group in the nation, where we actually had to have like 3 co-directors. It was a big deal. And so I remember so many people would come to the networking events, and they would come once and they would give their business cards out, and then they would call me and complain that they got no business.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, you weren't necessarily aligned with anybody that you talked to. You just gave out your business cards. Another example is like, there is the sweetest guy in my market who I think is just fun and wonderful. And I like being with him. We've got great stories all, over these past couple decades of working in the same industry. But my golden client isn't his golden client. And so, like, I want to work with him. He actually hired someone so that he could work with me more, but the person he hired wasn't someone my golden client would want. And so that whole alignment thing becomes a very incredible, it influences referrals when we start talking about creating growth. If you're looking at a referral-based business, if you're not in alignment with the people that you're either partnering with or that you want to work with, like, you've got to figure out, like, if you're going to niche out into a certain aspect of weddings, you need to see who else is out there in that same niche.
Yeah.
And that way you can start communicating with them, whether it's niches are all kinds of things. They could be your client. It could be a location. I know some people, I remember I used to have these doors at this desk that I used to sit at. Inside of it was like my goals. And I had the goals of the venues that I wanted to work at.
Oh.
And it was really interesting because I had like all the top resorts, the 5-star resorts and stuff on there. But what I realized was that it didn't matter the location that I was at. What mattered more to me was actually the client.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's how it worked out, where I know some people are like, I want to be referred by all the top resorts. Well, that might be your road to success. And if it is, follow that and do what you need to do to get on those lists. But I found for myself, it was actually the people that I worked with that made my job a delight. And that is a big part of what drives me to stay in the hospitality industry, is that if I'm going to surprise and delight people, I got to be happy to do that,
Yeah.
So,
no. Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's preparation. Do you have something to ask? And then I'll jump into the creating side.
Well, yeah. Well, real quick, I've thought of several businesses in my area that just jumped off the cliff, and I'm going to do this, or I'm starting this next part of my business, and 2 years later it's gone, or it failed, so it's just like, and they didn't do the work to research. And one of them I can identify was a couple people started a rental company here because they thought they would just take over the world and didn't think of all the aspects of picking up, having to clean everything and everything that goes with the rental company, that it's not the pretty side. They only see the pretty side is when it's sitting on the table and doing all that kind of stuff. And then the other thing I was going to say that you talked about too is when they were passing out business cards, is I think people don't realize it takes 2 to 3 years to develop a relationship. You don't attend one meeting and you don't get something right away. So if you're looking to grow, and it's not going to happen instantly as well. So you always got to be looking, you got to be 3 or 4 steps ahead of yourself. But go ahead, jump into the creative side.
All right. So on the creating side of growth, I look at 2 different buckets. You've got your short-term bucket and your long-term bucket.
Oh, okay.
So your short-term bucket is like money in the bank today.
Mm-hmm.
And then your long-term bucket is, where do I want my money to come from in the future? And so I'm constantly looking at those 2 things as I'm evolving my business into what I want it to be and creating that growth. For me, it's revenue growth. I know for other people, there's, market share, where they want to be like the only, or they want to be like the one everybody calls, there's so many different things that people want to achieve, and they use growth as the means to achieve it. But I think in general, revenue is something that drives most people in business. And so, but yeah, so you're looking at your short term and your long term game. And so obviously the first thing that most people think of is increasing bookings.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're looking for cash in the door right now, then the low hanging fruit, it's like, who do you know? Seriously, that's how it starts, is who do you know? I remember we were talking about DJ Krieger before
Mm-hmm.
this. Do you know he actually reached out to me when he was in my market, because he was here for a while and then he
Yep.
moved.
Yep.
And he had lunch with me, and he was like, "Who do I need to know?" And I'll tell you, that was actually a very wise thing to do, because I mean, he knew I have a soft spot for DJs, because, I used to be married to one. And ironically, when I go speaking, I always have a line of DJs that are lined up and they want to talk. It's fun. So, and I don't even talk to them specifically. It just happens. So, but I would say something wise to do would be to find like your WIPA group to go to. And if there isn't one there, then to go to the next closest one. I will tell you, like, I just booked a wedding in Phoenix, Arizona, and I spoke in Phoenix, Arizona. So I already am connected to people there to be able to facilitate this wedding. And so you have to look at your network. Like, then I was looking at my network in the long game. Like, where do I
Mm-hmm.
want my money to come from in the future? And so, so you have to be thinking of like, okay, who do you know? Who can you start connecting with? And start anywhere. I would say that when you're going through pricing, to be mindful of what is going on in the market,
Mm.
and to be very careful that, I mean, I saw this, you have to be so careful when you're doing events, because it's like a once in a lifetime thing, or it's a high priority to somebody if it's not like their wedding and it's an anniversary or some other kind of party. And so, so they're not going to be real happy with you if there's a mistake, or
Yep.
if they decide to cancel. Like, you really need to pay attention to your contract. I will tell you, my contract is 7 pages long.
Ours
Anyway,
is
I heard
6 now.
6. Nice. Yeah. So, but there was somebody in my market who's brand new. She actually worked with me a couple times and then launched too quickly. Didn't have a contract in place. Somebody
Oh.
decided to cancel their wedding, and they sent her payment via Venmo and literally just took it back.
Oh.
Yeah. So, yeah, so
Lots of wrongs right there.
lots of wrongs. And so I would say, yeah, who do you know? But start smart, and start with at least something that talks about what happens when things cancel. What happens when things go wrong? That's pretty much what you need to protect yourself from. I mean, you've designed everything that you're going to do, but what happens if there's a cancellation? What happens if, we had a landslide at one of the venues down here? What happens if that happens? How are you going to deal with any kind of rebooking and stuff? I know a lot of us during COVID had to go in and relook at our contracts and figure out, like, how do we protect ourselves now?
Yeah.
And
The next
so,
COVID.
yes. So, anyway, back to the short term gains. Marketing is always something I recommend that people do in the very beginning. You've got to establish yourself. I mean, even for people in the event industry, like, we need to know that you're there.
Mm-hmm.
If we start seeing your company in places and stuff, I'll have to tell you, for myself, and this is just for myself, I see a lot of people with beautiful Instagram feeds, and they've even got, you know, reviews and stuff on Yelp. I always am very careful, because I've worked with a lot of people that have those things and they're terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're doing your marketing, you need to come at it from a place of, gosh, what's the word it's kind of like humility, but
Yeah.
also, like, you just need to be real.
Yeah.
Instead of it being like, oh, I'm just starting. Like, tell people you're just starting. If you're just starting and you're priced a little bit lower than everybody else in the market, you're going to get people that sign up with you, because they're
Mm-hmm.
going to be like, okay, my budget isn't somebody that's been in the industry for 20 years. My budget is somebody who's under 5. But be real with them. Like, don't come in and be like, oh yeah, I totally know what I'm doing, because it's obvious to everybody, particularly the planners, when you don't. And so, yeah. You know
They're
that too?
well, yeah, or they're weekend warriors, and they have their corporate job during the week, and then they do the weekends or the weddings on the weekends, and but
Yeah.
they have they're the ones showing up with out a hand truck or a cart to move their flowers, or they're the ones that show up with out tape to tape down their cords, or maybe not even have an extension cord, or the everything they need to do their job. So
Truly. And
yeah,
then also, we'll touch on that real quick. It is
okay,
very wise to be self-contained.
100%.
Yes. And I think that that should be the expectation in the industry for each individual person that's coming to a wedding to be prepared. Um, like you were saying, I've been asked for extension cords and all kinds of like, do you have this in your kit? And I'm like, no, I don't come with that in my, and so,
Safety
um,
pins you got, but not,
yeah,
yeah,
safety pins. Yes, and needle and thread.
yeah.
But I will tell you, as far, and we'll touch on it real quick, as far as keeping your business going and your growth going, that will be your golden ticket, is to ensure that you are self-contained and that
Hmm.
you are not causing an issue for the venue or any of the other vendors who are there that day, in particular the wedding planner. I don't know if most areas have this, but we have a very collaborative wedding planner group here in Southern California, and they all talk.
Hmm.
And so if something happens, everybody knows that somebody, like, they'll say, "Hey, have you ever heard about this company? Have you ever worked with them?" And if somebody says, "Oh yeah, they came and they were late," and they give us all the story about what happened, it's problematic. And so when you're creating the growth and you're doing your job, make sure that you do it well and communicate. I see, it's funny. Sometimes I even see vendors. There's this other group that I'm part of on Facebook where somebody was complaining about planners. And they were like, "Oh yeah, the planners never do this." And I was like, all I did in the comment was, "Well, have you ever told the planner before the wedding that that's not what you want?" And then the whole post disappeared. And so I was just
Oh,
like, yeah. And so those are the kinds of things where you have to think like, what's going to make me stick is making everybody else's day easier.
hmm,
And so, and that's actually one of the things that the hotels know me for. And they always give me the difficult wedding. So I always say, okay, for every difficult wedding, you have to give me 2 nice ones. Like, we have to make these deals, right? Because these
yeah.
difficult ones are awful. But yeah, being able to make the day easy for everybody will help you stick around a lot longer.
Well, that too, and just like even like I've helped a photographer move bags before because the family was causing problems during the family pictures, and she was running behind, and she needed, like I've what can I help? How can I help you? Or I've helped
Totally.
the venue move chairs because they were moving them from ceremony to reception during cocktail. I'm doing nothing. Why not grab 4 chairs and help? And everyone around sees that you're helpful
Yeah.
in doing things, and
Right.
I think that goes a long way. I think you need to insert yourself when needed, but not overly insert yourself, because I've also seen that where it's like people at one point get a little too needy. Like, how can I help? What's next? Like where they want the attention, but it's not it's not needed at the time. So
Right. Well, and to carry your own weight, for a planner, it's actually quite important for all of the vendors to bring the timeline,
mm-hmm.
the same timeline.
Well, yeah.
Yes. No, I'll tell you that I've seen timelines where I've sent out the timeline and timelines are different or people don't bring them. It's interesting. So when my daughter started working with me, she's 23 now. She started working with me when she was 16. She could tell when a photographer didn't, or a DJ or whoever it was, didn't have a timeline because they kept asking us, "What's next?" all
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
And so as soon as, we call it the what's next buddy. And so she had to stay with them all day to walk them through whatever it was until it was time, to be all together where I could take over. But
Yeah.
it's just silly. Or, we bring extra copies of timelines and stuff. Anyway, that's the stickiness of making sure that once you create this growth, that you're going to stay around for a long time.
Well, and you're not user friendly when you're doing that as well. So
Right. Or a team player, which
yeah,
is incredibly important.
100%.
The other things that people do are add complementary services
Mm-hmm.
where, let's say you do one thing and then you want to expand. We have a lot of florists that have expanded into having a rental collection
Mm-hmm.
because they know that, well, if I'm doing flowers, generally people are going to want chairs and linens possibly and other things too. or, chandeliers or something that's, specific.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about what other things that you can do that are complementary. I think it's interesting when there's like a DJ company that offers videography because it's
Mm-hmm.
unrelated. I think for the right type of client, it makes sense because they're just looking like, hey, make my life easy. If I can call one place and get everything, I'm doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But not all clients are like that. So like my clients would never look at a DJ, go, yeah, I'll hire your videographer from a DJ. Like they just
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't. But
Yeah.
there are certain markets that are. So just knowing like if you're going to go into, because that's not necessarily complimentary, it's sort of like jumping, make sure that you're serving that clientele that would actually see that jump as a convenience and be like, yes, I will do
Mm-hmm.
that. But also know that if you're in that category, but you also want to work with planners, that it kind of rubs planners the wrong way when you're trying to do all the booking without
Mm-hmm.
the planner.
Yep.
So it's like you kind of have to evaluate that just like you do, like adding the chairs as a rental thing and the trucking and everything. It's the same thing when you're starting to add these other services of, well, how is that going to take away from the people I want to work with? And so, we see it all the time. Whenever the economy changes, everybody starts to become a generalist where planners become florists and, DJs and all this other stuff. And then during good times of economy, everybody becomes total specialists. And so, it's like this swing that goes back and forth, and we've seen it happen a few times. And so, just be aware that what you're doing, that if you're going to step on people's toes in the short game, that they remember.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
do. They do. I mean, all the wedding planners from the 2010 economic downturn remember all of the people that started to become planners too.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
Happen.
No. Yeah. It's kind of crazy how all you can think back, the economy boom,
Yeah.
like the 9/11, we had
Yes.
COVID, you name it, the Gulf War and whatever else that has happened in our country where it's caused,
Change.
big change. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we'll ever hopefully we'll never in our lifetime experience what we just went through with
No,
COVID. Yeah.
I
Cause
agree.
that was something that will,
Yeah, I have one more thing on creating growth.
all right, you go, girl.
It's actually adding a higher level of service.
Hmm.
So the done for you kind of thing, when people don't have time, like I work with a lot of people who are in med school or taking the bar,
Hmm.
and they literally do not have time. And so when I show them the I don't have time package, they're just like,
Sign me
win,
up.
let's go. So, and they know that, they're part of it. But I mean, I think for planners, that's a big deal. But then I think about some of the things I've seen DJs do where they actually do a pre-recorded first dance where they have like the bride and groom tell their love story,
Oh, it's
and
cute.
they play it over the music. So, I mean, there's things that you could do to create little pockets of revenue that increase your value,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the same day edit or giving somebody within 24 hours a 10-second clip so that they can put it on their Instagram, or 10 pictures, whatever. Just looking for how can I increase my service level? Like what do they want?
Mm-hmm.
And then literally design it and give it to them. They will pay you for it.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my daughters has a friend who's she floats we call it floating through weddings. My daughter does this. So she takes her cell phone and she floats through weddings and takes videos and pictures and stuff. And it's everything for social media. So if you ever see anything on our accounts, it's her.
Mm-hmm.
And so she has a friend who does the same thing where she's actually a social media person that will post on their whatever social media feed that they want posts on all throughout their event. So she's gone to Italy with people.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
she's gone all over the world documenting their weddings, but putting it on like the bride and groom's social feeds.
And it all happens from her iPhone. So it's not like she needs special equipment or anything to do
No,
it.
yeah. He
Yeah.
just logs in to their accounts and then records it.
That's amazing.
Right.
Yeah. That's who would I that's the first I've ever heard of that, but it's genius now that you say
Yeah.
it. And especially in today's world, that's something that's probably needed. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, you were talking real quick. I wanted to touch on it because you were talking about short-term goals and long-term goals.
Mm-hmm.
Can you define a short-term goal and what's a long-term goal, like as far as time-wise?
Yes. And so I set monthly revenue goals for myself.
Okay. Okay.
And so I used to call it in the beginning, I remember it was book 2, service 2.
Oh,
That was all I needed to hit my revenue goal. And so I
okay.
just looked at it like, how can I reach my goal this month to make all the money that I need to do everything I need to do?
Hmm.
And so in that case, it was book 2, service 2. And then your long-term goal would be like, for the year, what do I want to make?
Hmm.
And so, there's a bunch of different ways to look at it, like based on the products and services that you offer to determine, if I want to make 6 figures, let's just say 200K, just to be fun, because I know a lot of people are reaching for the 100. I think it's easier than you think.
Hmm.
But
Oh, way
reaching for that,
easier.
yeah, yeah, but reaching for that 200, then you're like, okay, so if I reach for the 200, how many of each things that I offer do I need to do? And then I do like a big circle around on the one I want to do most, and I put it up on my little board, and I, look at it. I'm like, okay, that's the new goal.
So, and then you talked about it with growth. Like, how often do we need to revisit, like what we're trying to accomplish?
Well, I
Is
look at it. I mean, if you're doing a monthly thing, you're looking at it every month.
okay.
If you're looking for a big time strategy change, it generally kind of creeps up on you in one of two ways. Either you have a choking cash problem where you don't have
Mm,
enough money coming in and you're looking at your reserves thinking, okay, what's left? How long can I go if nothing comes in? And then everybody starts to panic.
mm,
I have had more people call me this year about this year's wedding season being low than most any other time. They're like, oh my gosh, what are you seeing? What are you hearing?
yeah,
And
I'm experiencing the same thing.
yeah, well, I have theories.
Me too,
So,
but I would love to hear your theories.
okay, so I actually did back in 2010. I did a talk at the special event called "Who Moved My Brides." Remember that TV show?
Yep.
Gosh, I can't remember it
I
was "Who Moved My Cheese," the
yeah, yeah,
book.
yep, 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 yep.
So I said, "Who moved my brides?" And so I correlated the spending patterns of weddings to it's actually the consumer confidence index.
Mm,
So there's multiple lines to follow in the consumer confidence index, but one of them is like the projected. It's like, what
mm,
do consumers think is going to happen? Because they spend on what they think is going to happen for weddings because their wedding is in the future.
hmm.
And so I was looking at this year's trend lines to 2010's trend lines, and they're identical.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's nuts. And so I was like, okay, so the trend, so the state of what's happening is different, but the trend lines are the same.
Yeah.
And so, I think that is something that's impacted it. But I also have seen, and this is just speaking for my market, where the venues increased their rates, and a lot of vendors and everybody did too, because last year was nuts. I
Hmm.
mean, the year after COVID, we could have all like multiplied ourselves into 10 and still
And
had
still not.
more.
Yeah, exactly.
It was so busy. And so I think we were all looking at that thinking, okay, going forward, it's just going to stay like that.
Yeah.
And so everybody increased their rates, and then all of a sudden the consumer's like, but I'm not real confident that I want to spend that kind of money. And there's a group of people, like generally my golden clients are not in that category, and they're
Hmm.
just lucky like that because they've been real smart. And I think it's generational wealth too. So if that's your golden client, probably not going to be impacted.
Yeah.
Pretty much everybody else is thinking the same thing, where they're just like, then why don't we look at 2024? So I'm sure your bookings are pretty solid for 2024 or
They're
starting to
picking
get
up.
there.
Yeah, we get a lot
Yes,
of inquiries, a lot of stuff. We
right.
actually got one for 2025 the other day, and I'm like, whoa.
Nice.
I'm like,
That's a long
that's
time to work with
well,
somebody.
that's what I said. I'm like, that's a little far out. We don't even know what our prices are going to be for
Right.
2025 yet. So, anyway, but
Yeah.
so we're close on the theory, except for the consumer index. I never even thought about that. But like at one point we did 47 days in a row that we had at least one wedding in 2021. And then we go into 2022, and we're in the wedding boom. They said there was going to be 2.5 million weddings in the U.S. that year. So we're crunched a bunch of 2020 weddings and moved some 2021 weddings into all 2020 into 2021 and part of 2022. Then we have the wedding boom. Now things are looking normal. So I keep trying to compare I compared my company this year to where we were in 2019,
Yeah.
and that's what, and so we are ahead revenue wise where we were in 2019. So that's, I just feel like even though we are a little slow, like it feels slower, and I think it just feels slower because we're doing
It's normal.
well, yeah, but with that said, we are
Hmm.
doing next not the next Tuesday coming up will be our sixth Tuesday wedding that we've had so far this year. And then when we did our first Tuesday wedding, then we officially have done a wedding on every day of the week because we've been doing some Wednesday weddings
Right?
and lots of Monday weddings. So I also think people are getting a little bit more open to having weddings and off time. And I think COVID helped with that because people
I
were
think so.
going to weddings because they had no choice to have a Tuesday wedding or a Wednesday wedding, Monday wedding, or whatever it was, because that it was supply and demand. They
Yep.
had, and when we were doing those 47 weddings, we were like, 20 something days into it. And I just feel like it was next. All right, next, like who's next? Like it didn't feel, it felt weird. It was just a weird, I guess what it's like when you're own a wedding chapel in Las Vegas, where it's just like you do 15 weddings in a day
Yeah.
and you run them through. So, all
Hmm.
right. Lots of great things to think about. Anything you want to leave us with?
I think that the biggest drop of wisdom is actually when you're growing, be ready for the growth.
Yeah.
That whole preparation side of looking at, okay, so if I do this, then what?
Yeah.
That's really important because you don't want to find yourself selling stuff and then not being able to service it because then you're just toast.
Yeah. And I think that's when I see a lot of people in my market that fail. So,
Hmm.
or create a Shivari price war or whatever.
Yes,
Was it Shivari chairs you said?
it was. It brought
Yeah.
the prices down. I think they were like 12 something down to $4.99 or $5.
Yeah. Yeah. We had someone do something similar to that, but she was a bride here in my market. But she's still going to this
Ooh.
day.
Ah,
So, and she
can't
only
do
owns,
that.
yeah, she started out with the color of the Shivari chair she wanted for her wedding. And then she added the other color. And she only has two. And they live in a truck and they come in. She only owns 250. And if you don't fit her mold, she doesn't do it for you. So,
Interesting.
yeah, but it works for her.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, thank you so much. Before you go, I have a couple questions I like to ask all the guests here. So, what is your favorite part of the wedding day?
So my favorite part of the wedding day is when the bride is walking down the aisle. And,
Oh,
and let me tell you, so I was in corporate events and because I worked in an ad agency when I was younger and I was in charge of their corporate events, but I did one wedding and I was with the daughter. I'll never forget with the daughter and her dad in that moment where they look at each other and they're trying not to cry. And I'm like, oh, this is why I'm here. Like this feeling is why I'm here. Then COVID happens and it was literally like we shut down on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And I had a wedding that Saturday and it was going to be an off the charts wedding. It was going to be so incredible. Everything just fell apart. The bride about died and I just hung in there with her. I actually was her officiant.
no.
And so watching her after all those years of being behind the bride and not seeing their faces when she walked toward me, I was like trying to do everything I could not to cry because I was like, oh my gosh, this is even more special than I thought from the front.
Yeah.
So, yes, so that is my favorite moment.
That's a good one. You're the second person to tell me that.
Yes.
So, I think it's just always interesting we all have a different part of the wedding that means something to us. And I also think it changes throughout the years as
Mhm.
something happened. Like for me, it was kids that made it change for me. So
Yeah.
anyway, all right. So everyone knows I'm a little bit of an appy tech nerd. So what's your favorite app or something that you're using in your business right now that's helping you?
Oh, in my business?
Yeah,
That's
or
funny.
it could
I
be
was going to
personal.
say, let me just tell you, the Calm app is my thing.
What's that?
It's called the Calm app. And
Oh, Calm app. Okay.
Calm. Okay. And do you know they have AI inside of that Calm app that has like there's actually, it's called Infinite Flow. And they took a song and it changes all the time, but it's like the same kind of sound. And so when I'm working and focusing during the day, I've got that flow song going, and there's a few others that are like the infinite songs, and I never get bored of listening to that. And so, music has always been my thing, interestingly enough, even though I'm no longer married to a DJ. But yeah, I actually like the Calm app. But as far as productivity goes, I mean, I would say my notes.
Yeah.
I tend to use my notes for a lot of things, and they're so well, like right now, all my notes for this podcast are right there in my notes on my screen. So yeah.
I just
I'm kind of
recently,
simple.
you're an Apple girl, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I've had Evernote forever, like for 11 years. And I literally yesterday broke up with them. So it was
They're
a
pretty
long time.
complicated.
No, at the time they were more robust when they came out than Apple Notes was. And so, and I'm very loyal to my brands. I stick to, if I buy something, I'm going to buy it till I die kind of thing. Like I'll ride or die with Southwest Airlines and Apple and all these other things that I get known for. But, but they recently, new owners, and they doubled their price out of the blue, just doubled their price. And I was like, and I was happy paying it, even though I knew I could do it. Like I knew Apple Notes came a long way, but once they doubled their price, I'm like, well, and it's $60 for a year, which is not a lot of money, but I was like, this is bullshit. I was like, anyway, so that was my, and I've absolutely fell in love with Apple Notes because I've been using it now for the last couple weeks because I had to get everything transferred over and I fell in love with it. So anyway, I was they sent me a shirt that said Evernote on it. I had an Evernote.
Wow.
I had an Evernote scanner in my office.
VIP?
I was very fancy with Evernote. So
Love it.
I hope I'm in their computer system. They're going to be like, oh, when I broke up.
What happened to Kevin?
Yeah, I know. You never know. So, all right, girl. I can't thank you enough for being here today. It's
my pleasure.
I feel like we've touched on like 3 other topics partway through that we could go and do a whole topic on.
Sure.
Just attending a networking event like we were talking about.
I'll come back anytime.
Passing out business cards. I'm not allowed to say what I used to call it, but anyway, I get in trouble. It's not PC anymore. What I used to call it. Yeah.
Well, I called it pray and spray.
Oh, okay. I called it spray and pray, and I get in trouble for that.
You do?
Yeah.
Why?
It's not socially acceptable anymore. So,
I hadn't heard that. Well, I apologize.
So when I speak speak, I just say, "Oh, the people that walk around the room and pass out their business cards and expect to get business." I have to explain it a little bit more because people always got a good chuckle when you said, pray and spray.
Well, it's a great visual.
Yeah. So, yeah. Because we've all seen it happen so many times at a networking event. You can literally, we're at a networking event. You're like, watch this. Okay, there you go. Yeah. They're going to go to the next group and boom, 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 boom. And they're, and it's like you could literally see someone work the entire room doing that. So, all right, girl. So now that we're in trouble with whoever.
Yes, we apologize.
The PC police. So anyway. Yes. All right, Wendy, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mind Your Wedding Business podcast, brought to you by Wedding IQ. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. Please get in touch with me if you have a topic you would like for me to cover, or if you are in the area of your business you're struggling with, let us know. We'll be happy to help. I encourage you to check out our other episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're a fan, we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love for you to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. It helps others find our podcast so they can learn from our guests too. Thanks again for listening.